money to Ukraine so some kleptocrat can buy a bigger house. Foreign policy that doesn't look that different from that of Joe Biden. So there's a question for us to ask. What does it mean to be a Republican in the year 2024? What does it mean to be an American in the year 2024? You ask people my age that question, you get a blank stare in response. That is the vacuum. That is the void. To me, it means we believe in the ideals of 1776. Ideals like merit and the pursuit of excellence. That you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That's why I said we're going to end group quota systems and affirmative action in every area of American life. It's been a cancer on our national soul. We're going to end wokeness in the military. I'll be able to do that as your next commander-in-chief. The DEI agenda that has pervaded our government and every other area of American life. It means we believe in the rule of law. And I say this as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. And that is why we will use our own military to secure our own border in the United States of America. Our southern border and our northern border too. That's what it means to stand for the rule of law in the United States of America. It means that the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Not the shadow government in the deep state that's running the show today. If there's one foreign war that I will wage as your next one, I should say war that I will wage as your next president, it's not some pointless foreign war. It'll be the war on our own shadow government right here at home. You want to actually gut the deep state, actually drain the swamp this time around, here's how I'm going to do it. I'll fire 75% of the federal bureaucrats starting on day one. That's how you drain the swamp. I'm going to shut down government agencies that shouldn't exist. FBI, ATF, CDC, U.S. Department of Education. We're going to get in there and actually shut them down. That's how you revive the integrity of a constitutional republic. Don't start with last year's broken budget as the baseline and then try to massage it around the edges. No, we're going to start with zero as the baseline and ask what's actually necessary. Zero-based budgeting. That's what I'm bringing to the D.C. bureaucracy. It's how I run my businesses. It's how many CEOs run their businesses. It's how I'm going to run the federal government of the United States. That's how we fight the national debt crisis so that your generation doesn't grow up with $200,000 per person of national debt on your shoulders that you didn't sign up for. That's our obligation to your generation. These aren't black ideas or white ideas. These aren't even really Democrat ideas or Republican ideas. They shouldn't be. These are American ideals that we fought a revolution to secure in this country. And I believe, deep in my heart, that those ideals still exist. I'm running for president to revive them. It's the creed on the back of our coins, etched in there. You can see it. It says, E pluribus unum. It means from many, one. That's what we've lost in this country. We've been taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways that we are the same as Americans, bound by that common set of ideals. And here's how we're going to get them back. It's going to be by all of us, not just me. All of us starting to speak the truth in the open again. Say in public what you will say in private at the dinner table. Say it with a spine. Say it with conviction. Say it with respect. But part of respect is that you respect your neighbor enough to tell him what you actually think. And you see, that's what this campaign is about. Speaking the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it is hard. Speaking the truth, not just to the Democrats on the other side, but to our own side in this Republican Party, when necessary too. There's a reason I'm the only person in this race who will tell you that we will strip vaccine manufacturers of their special liability exemption, because that's crony capitalism, and where there has been injury, there needs to be justice. The only person who can tell you I am opposed to that CO2 pipeline because it's unconstitutional in its use of eminent domain. to tell you that it is based on a climate change agenda that absolutely is a hoax because it has nothing to do with the climate and everything to do with China catching up to the United States of America. To tell you that I will pardon every peaceful January 6th protester on my first day in office because that's the right thing to do for this country. That Ronna McDaniel, the failed chairwoman of the RNC, needs to step down after 5 failed years of leadership. Ask yourself, why am I the only candidate who can even touch these topics? Tell you the truth. It's because our politics is broken. It's been corrupted. Anymore, every politician is dancing to the tune of their biggest donor. And in my case, you want to know what? My biggest donor is me. I don't report to them. I report to you, the citizens of this country, not any other one. I'd rather speak the truth and lose this election than to win by playing some fake game of political snakes and ladders. But my bet is that's the winning strategy. That's not up to me. That's up to you. You guys have a decision to make in about, 7-8 days. The Iowa Caucus on January 15th. I'm asking you to take 30 minutes of your time that night to save this country. I'm asking for your vote on January 15th. Every one of them counts as the equivalent of 1 million people in the impact that it has in selecting the next president. But if you all do your part, I promise you, my family and I, my wife Apurva and I, we will do ours to make sure, not in some fake politician way, but in a true way, to make sure that our country's best days are actually still ahead of us. And I think, looking at the composition even of this room, I think it's going to take a leader whose best days in life are still yet ahead. I hope they are for me. I don't take that for granted. But I pray they are. A leader whose best days in life are still yet ahead, to see a country whose best days are ahead of itself. Thank you for coming out today, guys. I appreciate it. I want to open this up and give me the hard ones. I'm going to sit across the table from Xi Jinping in about 18 months so I can handle the hard ones. Let's open this up. You guys have an important decision to make, and I have a big ask to make of you to come out that night and do the right thing. Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, so I know you were in Perry last week at the tragic events that happened, and I know a lot of gun laws are more state-oriented, but what will you do at like a national level to make sure that events like that don't happen again?
Thank you, man. What's your name? If you don't mind?
Shay Scheidegger.
You might ask me, are you in college? Or?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Okay. Where at?
Northwestern here.
Okay. Yeah, it was a difficult morning, to say the least. I happened to be in Perry right the morning where it happened, and we canceled our event like this, but we had a roundtable discussion of a session of prayer and a session of open discussion. I'll tell you how we can make sure something like that never happens again in this country at a school. We can do that right now. 3 armed security guards in every school across this country. I think that's non-negotiable. Speaking as a parent of 2 sons, no parent in this country should have to think twice about whether they want to send their kids to school for fear of another school shooting. That's how you prevent it. 1 per school would not get the job done. 3 per school would. We can do it for a tiny fraction of the U.S. Department of Education spending. What I've said is I'm going to shut down that agency, give $80 billion back to the states and to the people so that parents are able to choose where they send their kids to school. But for a tiny sliver of that, that could easily fund 3 armed security guards in every school. So that's how we make sure something like what happened in Perry never happens again in this country. It's unconscionable. Now, in the longer run, we need to start on this soon, is address the mental health epidemic in this country. There's a mental health sickness spreading across this country like wildfire. We need to bring back the psychiatric institutions that we closed in this country starting about 40 years ago. And the dirty underbelly of that, not a lot of people know this, is that it was actually the product of pharmaceutical industry lobbying. When the pharmaceutical industry got its first wave of the blockbuster antipsychotic drugs near approval, it was more advantageous for them to have people not locked up in psychiatric institutions, just let them loose. So there's been a direct correlation over the same period that we have closed psychiatric institutions. We've seen a spike in violent crime. And I think we also have a healthcare system that does not pay for mental health. We don't have a competitive health insurance marketplace. I mean, this gets into a deeper issue. My first company was in the healthcare industry. My wife, Apurva, is a surgeon. She actually doesn't get paid for, she actually personally does not get paid for many of the procedures that she does, even though they are the procedures that allow patients to swallow food after years who haven't done it, even though the system will pay for all kinds of expensive pill-pushing behaviors and all kinds of expensive feeding tubes or other interventions. Because we don't have a healthcare system in this country, we have a sick care system. And that applies to mental health too. We don't do anything on the preventative side, but we're actually only just focused, just like the rest of our healthcare system, when there's a catastrophe on the back end. So that's how we're going to address it. There's going to be the temptation to say, hey, you know, pass some gun restriction or Second Amendment infringement, call it a day. No, the right answer is not to remove guns from law-abiding citizens. In fact, the cities in this country with the tightest gun control laws are the ones with, by far, the most gun-related violence. So the right answer is really to remove psychiatrically ill and dangerous people from their communities. And if we have the courage to do that and combine that with actually protecting our children, for God's sake, we have more security in a bank or in a shopping mall or, you know it, at the airports, than you do even in our own schools. That says we haven't gotten our priorities straight. Those are 3 things I can do as your next president. And I think it's a really fair and important question. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Right here.
So, Vivek, one of my questions is, for me, one of the biggest issues is life and making sure that the evil abortion isn't propagated throughout our nation. How, sell me on how are you going to help protect those lives without overstepping the authority that is given to the executive branch?
Great, thank you. And I appreciate you not asking that question in the terms that I usually get asked it at Republican and political events, which is how are you going to address this, but still make sure we don't lose the election in 2024, actually. That's really where the issue usually comes up, is everybody thinks this is going to be the loser for Republicans in 2024. So I'll answer it, all of that in one answer, which starts with my conviction, which is that unborn life is life. And we can back into that through faith, and I am happy to tell you about my faith. I'll say a word about it for a second. I'm Hindu, which is slightly different than the traditional faith background of people who have run for U.S. president. Our value set is the same. I believe there's one true God. He puts us here for a purpose. It's our moral duty to realize that purpose. But we are all equal because God resides in each of us. So in part it's my faith that leads me to my pro-life views, but it's also logic. And we say that life ends when brain waves end. Nobody debates that. That means life begins certainly no later than when brain waves begin, which is about at 5 or 6 weeks after conception. There's a case of, and I think most of us share these intuitions in common. I can almost prove that to you. There's a case of a pregnant woman who was assaulted. The unborn child died. Find me one person in this country who says that that criminal should not be punished in some way for that death. I haven't met one yet. Left, right, doesn't matter. So it says we share those same instincts in common, but what's happened with this issue is, and I think it's the pro-life, I think it's the conservatives' fault, actually, that we let this happen. That it's been reframed into a men's rights versus women's rights issue. And I said that it's our fault because we haven't actually stood strongly enough for actually being pro-life. So the way I'm going to lead us to victory on broadly for our country, without letting this issue necessarily get in our way, but to the contrary, lead us to victory, is by standing for our principles even more strongly than we have. I'll tell you what I mean by that. If we're really pro-life, let's walk the walk. I favor policies expanding access to child care, access to adoption, crisis pregnancy care, all of which is badly missing, or at least inaccessible to countless women today. And then speaking as a man, and here's the one that I still can't figure this out, why I'm the only person in the Republican Party who has embraced this. So I'd love for more to take this up, Steve. Maybe you can help me with that in Iowa. Is greater sexual responsibility for men codified in the law? So if the woman brings a child to term, I think she should, at her option, be able to make the man the financially responsible party for both her and the child, which is effectively raising the child times 2, or it could be a multiple times 2.5. and make that the law now. So now it's not about men's rights versus women's rights. It's about human rights. And I do think that that's fair. I mean, the woman is one of the truths in there. There are two genders. There are differences between men and women. One of them is that women bear children and men do not. And for those who find that controversial, you're probably not going to vote for me. So, and that's okay. You're allowed to disagree. But that's just hard fact. That's truth. Well, in that case, there are actual differences. But how do we, in the face of those differences, still do what's just? So we can't just, as a pro-life movement, walk away and say, yeah, but, you know, women, you bear that responsibility. And too bad, we're still pro-life. No, have we done everything in our power to say that we're all in this together? We haven't done that yet. And in an era of genetic paternity tests, which we're in now, which we weren't in, even at the time of 40 or 50 years ago, that are 100% accurate, yes, I think that that is a fair position for Republicans to not only just accept, but to advocate for. And so if we do that, no, I don't think this is a losing issue for us. We're standing on our principles without compromising on it. A lot of this does need to be driven at the state level, because I am a constitutionalist. I don't believe in reading interpretations into the Commerce Clause that aren't there. The 10th Amendment says that which is not reserved to the states is reserved respectively, that reserved to the federal government is reserved respectively to the states and to the people. But as a matter of policy, that's what I favor. That's how we stand for our principle while also uniting the country on perhaps the most difficult issue that everybody else would tell you we're not going to get unity on. I think this is the right way forward for our movement, and I think I'm going to lead us to get there. Thank you. I appreciate that. Sir.
Yeah, I guess I would like to hear a little bit more about your faith, because it's my belief that you don't have the same God as me as a Christian, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Your beliefs.
Yeah, thank you. What's your name? Charlie. And how old are you? 18. Well, first of all, I am grateful to your young person in a room full of people at the age of 18 to ask a question about faith and to be proud to speak to your own. It's almost as though God has become a four-letter word in our culture, and it shouldn't be. So I'll tell you a bit more about my faith. Instead of Hindu, core belief system for me, and this is the faith I was raised in, one true God. On my faith, actually, it would say it is the same true God, but others, you know, that could be different from a Christian vantage point or not. But from my vantage point, it's the same true God. He puts us here for a purpose, and God gives everyone our own unique God-given gifts. But it's our obligation to use them to do what is right. God works through us. We're his instruments. Yet we are still equal. Even though God works through us in different ways, we're still equal because God resides in each of us, because we're equal in the eyes of God. That's the heart of my faith. I left, actually, probably when I was about your age or so. I actually, considered myself agnostic and through much of my early 20s, but I came back to it as an adult. But I had what you would call not a traditional, but a very traditional upbringing, actually. My parents taught us that family is the foundation, that marriage is sacred. They taught us it's between a man and a woman, that divorce isn't some option you just pick off a menu when things go a little wrong from time to time, that adultery is wrong, that the good things in life involve a sacrifice. It's not just about this life, it's about the eternal life. Those are the core values that I was raised in. Now, I went to St. Xavier High School, which is a Christian school in Cincinnati, and I read the Bible for the first time in 9th grade, and we get early on into the 10 Commandments. What do they say? There's one true God. Don't take his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath. Honor your parents. Don't lie. Don't cheat. Don't kill. It's important to my pro-life views as well. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't covet. It didn't feel like I was reading many of these values for the first time. To me, it felt like, actually, that's when it hit me. These values don't belong to Hindus. Just as they don't belong to particularly one faith, they belong to God. So, anyway, as I look at the role that I'm running for right now, I'm obviously not going to be the best president to spread Christianity throughout this country. But I don't think that's the role of the president, right? I think that my friend Mike Domestis is with us in the room. He's a pastor, and he has a role to play, just as I have a role to play. Each of us has a role to play. But my role as your next president is to stand for those shared values, and more precisely to swear an oath to the Constitution and to keep it, so that every pastor and every parent and every teacher and every coach and every citizen in this country is free to speak their mind openly and free to worship as they see fit. And the irony is, we've actually seen an assault on religious liberty over the course of the last 20 years that our politicians in both parties haven't done a very good job of protecting against. Some of it's through the front door, the FBI weaponizing justice against people of one faith, generally Christian faith. You have the ESG movement through the back door, stopping lending or flow of financial funds to people who show up on a Southern Poverty Law Center hate group list, just because they might be a Christian organization that adopts a traditional view of marriage. And I think that that's wrong, and I don't think the existing politicians, if I may say, including Christian politicians, have done a very good job at protecting against that assault on religious liberty in this country. And so I believe, because I think I'm the best person in this country who's going to be able and knowledgeable enough to actually shut down that deep state, actually shut down that regulatory overreach, because I actually understand the Constitution and will swear an oath to that Constitution and keep it. I think I'm the best positioned person to actually protect religious liberty for people of all faiths, including those of Christian faith, who are especially undergoing, I think, an assault in our modern culture today. And to make faith and family and patriotism and hard work cool again in this country through the example that we set. And the core teaching of my faith is that we don't get to choose who God works through. God chooses who God works through. St. Xavier, we get a little further that semester into the book of Isaiah. I think that's a core teaching in the book of Isaiah. God chose Cyrus, a Gentile, all the way in Persia, to lead the Jews back to the promised land. And I do think God puts each of us here for a purpose, and for me it is my faith that leads me to do what we're doing now. And just to bring this back to the role of the presidency, I think right now it's going to take someone coming in from the outside. A businessman, not a politician. Somebody with sharp elbows. Somebody who's willing to break things when necessary. And I bring that, I don't know if you guys have been following this race or the debates or otherwise, but I bring that on steroids in Washington, D.C. But it also takes an outsider who knows and deeply understands the law and the Constitution of this country. And those two things don't usually go together. Right? You might have the scholarly academic type over here. You might have the business guy who's going to be an executive and get things done over here. Those two things don't usually go together. But that's what gives me my sense of duty. As I said, I think God gives each of us our own unique God-given gifts. And it is our duty to use those gifts to do what is right in the short time that we are given. And so anyway, that's what leads me to this race, and my faith is an important part of that. It's important to me too, and I hope that begins to address the question that you have. You sound like you wanted to follow up on that. Now, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the opportunity to share that with you all. And I hope that people of every faith in this country, we live in a religiously pluralistic country, I hope people of every faith were able to revive those shared values that have now become foreign in our culture. They're not foreign to most of us. It might look foreign if you turn on the TV or go to a movie theater, or you go to the DEI training session at your company, or look at what they're teaching your kids in schools. But those are not foreign values to most of us. And I think it's going to take a president with the spine to actually stand for those values. And you're darn right I will. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Go right here, sir.
I don't think it's a coincidence that under President Trump we didn't have these endless wars going on. And I know that's one of the things that attracts me to you, is you pushing back against that. You kind of did it before it was cool, before Nikki and stuff was doing it. How do you go about getting the party to agree with you? Like the Lindsey Grahams of the world, they love these endless wars. How do you wean them off that and get them? They're not sustainable.
I'm going to say something a little uncouth, but it's the truth. First, end the corruption, actually. But we have a major problem with people who make money off of the policies they advance, and that includes foreign wars. I mean, you got Joe Biden. I think part of the reason why we're sending $200 billion of our own taxpayer money to Ukraine is that that's the very country that paid a $5 million bribe to Joe Biden's son. He brought up Nikki Haley. Her family operates a military contracting firm, joins the board of Boeing, effectively has a military contracting government connection using line of business since leaving the UN that stands to make money from the very wars they advocate for. So it's a bipartisan affair. Republican or Democrat, I don't care. We have to end the corruption first. I think the other thing is we got to wake up to the reality that we don't have the luxury to be pontificating about which foreign war we're doing in some battle versus good versus evil. Let me just say, first of all, I reject the good versus evil mythology in Ukraine. And Ukraine's one of the most corrupt nations on planet Earth. It's not a democracy. It's banned 11 opposition parties. It has consolidated all media into one state TV media arm. The eastern regions of Ukraine are Russian-speaking regions that haven't participated in Ukrainian parliamentary elections for the better part of 10 years. And so a lot of the mythology you're fed by the mainstream media is, I think, a lot of garbage. But put that to one side. We have a major vulnerability right here at home. We're more vulnerable to cyber attacks, super EMP, electromagnetic pulse attacks, border incursions. Look what's happening at our southern border. Missile attacks, space-based attacks, defenses that are lacking. I think that what we need to do, we're $34 trillion in the hole. As your next president, you don't know what my foreign policy priorities are. It's to keep us out of World War III. It's to declare economic independence from communist China. And then to use our own national defense spending to defend our own homeland right here in the United States of America at a moment where we're more vulnerable than we've ever been, at a moment where we're closer to World War III than we have ever been in my lifetime. So that's what I think is going to wake up the Republican Party, is less about we can talk about bickering over one conflict or other at the periphery. But instead, actually, if we wake up ourselves to the vulnerability right here at home, let's talk about October 7th in Israel. If that can happen in Israel, that can happen right here at home in the United States of America. God forbid that it does. It's my job as your next president to make sure that it doesn't. So I think that that's, when you ask about bringing Republicans along, I think that's the way I'm going to do it. And this shouldn't be a partisan point. It's not just about bringing Republicans along. This should be a fundamental American issue, that we cannot tolerate a super electromagnetic pulse attack that takes out half of our electric grid, which could leave a third of this population dead in a matter of 6 to 9 months. And so I think it's going to take somebody who understands that priority. As a father, my obligation is to my family, and I will not be shaken in that. As your next president, my moral obligation is to you, the citizens of this country, not another one. A lot of young people in the room. I'll tell you, my obligation to your generation is to make sure that you don't grow up with $200,000 of somebody else's debt on your shoulders that you didn't sign up for. And equally importantly, that you don't have somebody else's gun over your shoulder fighting somebody else's war in somebody else's trench when we're closer to World War III than we've been in my lifetime. The 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Sometimes if you make mistakes, we're human beings. We're fallen. We're a nation founded on ideals. We're always going to fall short of them, but we've got to learn from that. Those 2 wars accumulated $7 trillion of our national debt, and we sent tens of thousands of our sons and daughters to go die. 20 years later, the Taliban is still in charge in Afghanistan, and Iraq is a more broken country than when we first showed up. So I refuse to make those same mistakes again. And to the contrary, I'm focused on protecting our own homeland and fighting our national debt in this country. I'm happy to also address how I'm going to do that. It relates to our national security. $34 trillion in national debt. How do we address it without cutting Social Security and Medicare? Much of the Republican Party wants to cut your Social Security, cut your veterans' benefits, and fork over more money so some kleptocrat in Ukraine buys that bigger house. Here's how we're actually going to address this in a manner that doesn't cut your Social Security, but is a pragmatic plan for buying down our national debt. Get the oil and natural gas out from underneath our ground and sell it. That instantly buys down about $8 trillion of our national debt. Go to the next step. Avoid the foreign wars. $7 trillion. Don't roll that over in places like Ukraine. End foreign aid to any country whose national debt per person is less than ours. And then slash 75% of the federal bureaucracy. And I don't mean that figuratively. I mean it literally. On day one, we're going to start with 50% across the board, 75% mass firing by the end of my first term. This is how you put the interests of our country first. And I think that the good news is the fact that isn't just a traditional Republican vision necessarily. It says that I think 80% of this country agrees with that view. I think half, 20% are people who may not have learned those ideals in the first place who are coming along too. And so I think with that vision of actually taking America first to the next level, it's bigger than black versus white or red versus blue, I'll be able to deliver you a landslide in this general election. And this can't be another one of those 50.1 tug-of-war elections. We're skating on thin ice. This has to be a moral mandate. This has to be a landslide like what Ronald Reagan delivered in 1980. That's what I'm delivering you as your next president. That's my duty to you. And if we get that right, then, you know, a landslide minus some shenanigans is still a victory. That's some real talk there. Once we're in, we're going to fix the election system. Single-day voting on election day as a national holiday with paper ballots, government-issued voter ID to match the voter file, and English as the sole language that appears on a ballot. That's not too much to ask. But the way we're going to do this is make sure we restore the mission and purpose of our military and our national defense to defend our own homeland, and I will. Thank you. I appreciate that. Please.
Thank you. How would you ensure that the absence of experience and the lack of international relations will not result in insensible decisions, but secure the U.S. leadership in the world?
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I personally believe that it is going to take somebody with fresh legs from that next generation to actually do what's right. I mean, look at what the foreign policy establishment and experience, as you're referring to myself being first time outsider. I'm 38 years old. I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. I grew up in a generation where our government systematically lied to us for the last 25 years, even in the last 10 years. The Trump-Russia collusion hoax, the origin of COVID-19, the Hunter Biden laptop story, how our money's being spent in Ukraine, the truth about what really happened on January 6th, which I don't believe we've been fully told yet. We have a government that systematically lied to its people. We have a government that has sent people your age to go die in foreign wars that didn't advance this country's interests. If somebody keeps crashing your car, don't turn over your keys to the same person. I think it's going to take somebody coming in from the outside. Now, I do have a lot of experience taking on bureaucracies. I'm 38, but I've built multi-billion-dollar companies. I took on Big Pharma, developed medicines that they refused to, did it at a fraction of the cost and speed, and ended up, you know, one of those is life-saving therapy for kids today. The kids are alive today that wouldn't because of the therapy that we worked on that's FDA approved. That's one of 5 that I worked on. After that, I started Strive, the leading competitor to the ESG cancer. BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard manage over $24 trillion. I started the leading anti-ESG asset manager that challenged those firms head on. And you know what? A year after launching the first fund, Strive crossed over $1 billion in assets under management. So I built my career getting to where I am by taking on bureaucracies and winning. But now we're taking on the mother of all bureaucracies, and that's the bureaucracy in the federal government. And if an existing politician with experience were to have gotten this done, we wouldn't be where we are. And that's what gives me my sense of obligation and purpose. I mean, in that sense, it's the heart of my faith, that if we're given these, every one of us has our God-given gift. It's our duty to use them. And so I believe it's going to take somebody. Foreign policy experience is not the same as foreign policy wisdom. I don't know if you watch some of the debates, but even when we're debating the issue of Ukraine, I asked some of the top Ukraine hawks on that debate stage, tell me 3 provinces in eastern Ukraine you even want us to fight for. They couldn't name them. And I think that it's not just naming the provinces, it's knowing the history of whether or not those are actually fundamentally part of Ukraine or have actually a more complex history to them. And so one of the things I've realized about, frankly, professional politicians in both parties, folks like Steve King are the exception to this, but most of these people many of them are intellectual frauds, right? They don't really even have their own convictions. They're going to do what their donor puppet masters tell them to do, move them like pawns on a chessboard. I'm not bought and paid for. We have spent, bluntly, close to $30 million of our own family's hard-earned money. I didn't inherit it, but our hard-earned money on this campaign precisely because I don't want to be somebody else's circus monkey, somebody's pawn on a chessboard. And so I do think that's what it's going to take to actually make the right decisions for this country. And I do believe that my knowledge and ability to do it, both to shut down the deep state at home and to actually negotiate a reasonable end to the Ukraine war, to have a true America First vision, protecting us against the actual threats we face from cyber to super EMP to other missile attacks, I think is far ahead of certainly the peer group that I'm running for U.S. President, and I plan to leverage that to do what's right for this country. Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll go here and then here.
I didn't intend to be here. I just happened to see you here.
Oh,
But I'm very, very glad I'm here because I agree with almost all your policies, except I think your policy on international and especially your policy in Ukraine is somewhat misguided a little bit. I've been to Ukraine numerous times, okay, and I think there's actually a Ukrainian with me right out here. I would like you to talk to her afterwards.
We have several on our team
Okay.
as well.
And I think she has an in-depth knowledge of living in Ukraine, living in Ukraine under Soviet rule, and the centuries of history between the Russian and the Ukrainians. So she's enlightened me, okay, and anyway, I sort of view what Russia is doing in Ukraine similar to what Hitler did in Germany. And he dehumanizes the Ukrainians and he wants to exterminate all of them. And so I think Ukrainians do need help from the international community to ward off that genocide that Russia wants to impose on Ukrainians, which they tried many times in the past. Thank you.
Since we got a couple questions on this, I'll go a layer deeper than I usually do. Thank you for sharing your perspective, sir. There's a lot to say here. I reject the comparison to Nazi Germany. I think that the history is actually a lot more complex here. But more importantly, I'm running for President of the United States, not for Secretary General of the UN, not for any other position. I'm running for President of the United States. What's the top threat that we face right now? It is the Russia-China military alliance. Well, southern border, I mean, long-run threat to World War III, yeah, our southern border. And that's why I believe that we have no place sending $200 billion of our taxpayer money to protect somebody else's border when we're failing to protect our own border right here. If that was happening on the western border or the eastern border with 3 million Chinese or 3 million Iranians, we'd call that an invasion. It's absolutely an invasion on our own southern border. And I've offered a clear plan for how to do it. We'll move our troops to our southern border. We'll end federal funding for sanctuary cities. We're going to end birthright citizenship for the kids of illegals. We're going to require Central American countries as any condition for any aid at all to build walls on their own borders from Venezuela to the northern border of Mexico. That's where we need to focus. But as it relates to Russia-Ukraine, I'm worried that we're increasing the risk of World War III for this reason. The Russia-China military alliance is the greatest threat we face. Russia's nuclear stockpile capabilities and hypersonic missiles are ahead of that of the U.S. Combine that with China's Navy, which has more ships than we do, and an economy that we depend on for our modern way of life, those two countries together actually outmatch the United States. And as we arm Ukraine and other steps we've taken, we're actually driving Russia further into China's hands, strengthening that alliance. And so I think it would be better for the U.S. and arguably even for Ukraine to negotiate a reasonable end to that war, which is what I would do. So the terms of that deal would be, first is we'll make a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. This is just keeping a prior commitment that we made. James Baker, our Secretary of State. Well, I can talk about that too. We can go. So then, have you read the Budapest Memorandum, sir? Because it's actually worth reading. It's a 2-page document. So the Budapest Memorandum in 1994 refers to the U.S. and the U.K. and Russia being committed to protect Ukraine's sovereignty. Read the language of that. We have more than fulfilled our obligations pursuant to the Budapest Memorandum. And it is unclear, nobody in Washington, D.C. has provided the first gasp of an answer to what the next $100 billion is going to do that the first $100 billion didn't do. So I think it's better for Ukraine. Right now the track that this war is on is Ukraine may not even come out with its sovereignty intact. What I would do is a reasonable deal. It's two sides to any deal. We will make a hard commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. We will make a hard requirement that Russia exit its military alliance with China. So that's what we say for the alliance we're in, that's what we say for the alliance they're in. And then reasonable territorial deal in eastern Ukraine for the regions that are occupied. That's better for Ukraine, better for the United States, but more importantly, avoids escalating into World War III when we are closer to World War III than we've ever been in my lifetime. And for the young people in the room, I want to put it on a fine point. With our home homeland as vulnerable as we've ever been. If we enter World War III right now, there's a very real chance the United States of America would cease to exist. Actually. That we would lose. With hypersonic missile capabilities in Russia's hands, naval capacity in China's hands, try a super EMP attack across half this country. If you take out our electric grid, 6 to 9 months, a good portion of this country is dead without actually even firing a nuclear weapon or a missile. So we don't have, I think sometimes our foreign policy establishment has fallen into the trap of operating some sort of luxury world. It's not 1991 anymore. The bipartisan establishment made a lot of mistakes over the last 30 years, and I'm not sitting here to complain about them. But to be very realistic about where we're starting now, a border incursion into this country, if that can happen on October 7th in Israel, that can happen right here at home in the United States of America. We need to wake up to that reality. And yes, I was clear on this position in Ukraine back before this was popular. I was the only Republican who adopted this. Now even, a lot of the people who were the Ukraine hawks for much of the last year are quietly coming around to the same view because they don't have a clear answer to the question either of what the next 100 or 200 or even 300 billion is going to do that the first 100 billion didn't. And so that's what I believe it means to advance our interests while reducing the risk of World War III with the reasonable deal that I think you can make a strong argument is even better for Ukraine than the current trajectory that we're on. So I respect you for asking the question, sir. We'll come to you.
President Trump did a number of positive things to help dismantle the deep state.
He started.
Yeah, and so can you comment on how you would continue that and maybe have ways that might even be more effective? I mean, even President Reagan said, I want to get rid of the Department of Education.
So I give Donald Trump immense credit for rolling that log over in that swamp, and we saw what crawled out. The analogy I'd give you is I'm bringing the pesticide. Okay, that's what we're actually doing, is using the law and the Constitution on our side to get this right. They duped him in some ways, and they duped Reagan too. But Trump in particular, they told him, you can't fire those civil service employees because of civil service protections. Read the law. Those civil service protections do not apply to mass firings. And mass firings are absolutely what I'm bringing to the D.C. bureaucracy. Shutting down agencies, they say you can't do it. Well, in certain cases, so I haven't pledged to shut down the FDA or the SEC, though on a first principles basis I would prefer to. But that requires Congress. But the agencies I've told you I will shut down, FBI, ATF, CDC, U.S. Department of Education, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, these are agencies the U.S. President can shut down. There's limited circumstances where the U.S. President already has the power to do it. If it promotes the efficiency of operations in government or it promotes the economy, the U.S. President can. And it goes back to what I said to the gentleman in the front in response actually to the question about faith. This takes a president who not only brings the muscle, but also knows and deeply understands the law and the Constitution, so they can't be duped. And so, yes, I am in this to take our America First agenda to the next level. They told Trump you couldn't end birthright citizenship for the kids of illegals. If you read the 14th Amendment, it actually does not apply to giving birthright citizenship to somebody who's here illegally. The opening words of the 14th Amendment are clear on that. They told him you can't initiate mass deportations because there's only 6,000 ICE agents, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement agents. Well, if you read the law, you realize that that allows the president and ICE to use local law enforcement to serve their warrants. But it takes a commander-in-chief and a president and then somebody leading ICE with the spine to actually do it. So yes, I think I'm going to take our America First agenda far further than Donald Trump did, building on what he laid. And I'm going to give him credit for the great Supreme Court that he gave us. Because part of what I have that he didn't was that Supreme Court. So everything I'm telling you, the Supreme Court agrees with me 6-3 on. So now the president who comes after me won't have his hands tied in the same way, because it's codified in judicial precedent. That's how we actually get this job done. And so you got to think on the time scales of history. This is where we're going. And one point about Trump is, by show of hands, they may have asked you beforehand. I apologize for my benefit. How many of you have participated in Iowa Caucus before? Good. And how many of you are planning to be first-time caucus goers this time around? Well, I want the rest of you who haven't been to one to do it this time, because it's the equivalent of 1 million people. The impact that every one of your voices has in selecting the next president. And I think there's two America First candidates in this race. That's Donald Trump and myself. I've given him more respect than everybody else in this race because it's the right thing to do. He was a good president. He was a very good president. And I respect his legacy, and I will as your next president, too. I've stood up against the corrupt and what I see as unconstitutional persecutions through prosecution. I've called on every Republican to remove themselves from the ballots in Maine and Colorado, myself included, if they remove Donald Trump, because it's wrong and unconstitutional for some Secretary of State to decide arbitrarily to remove one man from a ballot. It's wrong, and I've stood up against it. But if you think at this point that they are going to let Donald Trump get anywhere near that White House again, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. These people, I think, have made clear they will stop at nothing. And I increasingly believe stop at nothing to stop this man from getting anywhere near the White House. And I think they've laid a trap for us, actually. I think they want to make this a two-horse race between Donald Trump and a puppet they can control, get it deep enough into the spring, eliminate Trump, trot in the puppet. They're selling us the rope today, right now, that they will use to hang us tomorrow. And I want you to fast forward a year. Are you going to look back and say, oh, I was shocked that that happened? Or are you going to say, oh, that was obvious. We should have seen it coming, and how did we walk into that trap? Do not fall for their trap. It's our obligation. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Our America First movement did not begin in 2016. It began in 1776. We owe it to our founding fathers. We owe it to this country to do what's right for this country, to make sure our movement does not end with Donald Trump. We love the man because he got this fight started, but now it is our job to step up and to finish it. That's our duty to this nation, that we have another 250 years, and then some still left. And I think that's going to take, we're in the middle of a war in this country right now. I'll call that for what it is. It's not a war between black and white or Democrat and Republican even. It is a war between those of us who love our United States of America and a fringe minority who hates this country and what we stand for. A war between the permanent state and the everyday citizen. Between the Great Reset and the Great Uprising. That's the real dividing line. And I think we need now a commander-in-chief who will lead us to victory in this war. Somebody from the outside, somebody from the next generation with fresh legs to reach and lead that new generation. And so I think that that's why I'm in this race able to go further. We're going to build on where he left off. I've even said, and I'll stand by it, that I'll take him as my most important advisor during that first year. Know where the bodies are buried. Let's get this right. I don't want to relearn those same lessons. But I'm best positioned to lead this country from the front and, dare I say, go further with our agenda and unite this country in the process. Not by compromising on our principles, but by being uncompromising about who we are and what we stand for. You think about this country, the ideals that the country was founded on, they're not moderate ideals. The idea that you get to speak your mind in the open as long as I get to in return, that's a radical idea. For most of human history, in old world Europe, it was done the other way. The idea that we, the people, create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That every one of us gets a voice and a vote in a constitutional republic. That's crazy talk. For most of old world Europe, most of human history, these are radical ideals. That's what makes America great. That is what makes America itself. And that's how I'm going to reunite this country. Not by showing up in some proverbial middle and compromising, holding hands and calling it a day. That's fake. The way we're going to unite this country is by reviving the ideals, yes, the revolutionary ideals that unite all of us as Americans. That's what we need to bring back in this country. And I think it's going to take, I think Trump went about as far as he was going to go, and I respect him for that. But especially when we see the trap they've laid, I'm going to ask you to not fall into it. To skate to where the puck is going. And to go with the future of America first, because we don't have a long time to wait for our future unless we get this right and do it soon. So thank you for that question, sir. I think we have time for one last question. Yeah, thank you. We'll give you the final word, my man.
So you mentioned that there's a trap for Donald Trump, and that, that's that. How are you going to avoid that as someone who's also trying to tell the truth?
I believe I'm the best chance we have. And the reality is we're in the middle of a war. The other side is not sitting by idly. But my understanding of the law and the Constitution, I think, is something that, frankly, goes beyond what anybody else in this race, including Trump, brings. And I think that's going to be required to use this in our favor. Think of yourself as choosing a general, a commander-in-chief to lead us to victory in a war that we're in. You wouldn't pick the one who's already wounded 4 or 5 times over in that same war. It's wrong what they've done to him. I've said it, and I'm the only candidate to clearly state it, and I said it a long time ago. Instantly, as soon as this prosecutions began, it's the right thing. I will pardon Donald Trump. In some ways, if you want to save Trump, voting for me is the surest way to do it, actually. So I believe that a general who's not yet wounded in that war and who has fresh legs and an understanding of the Constitution has a better chance of getting this right, rather than the person who they've already decided as a system to go after. And I've had some success with it. I mean, if you look at this campaign, you know, I'm not like a lot of Republicans that may hide from certain left-wing conversations. I faced off with Don Lemon. He no longer has his job. Faced off, go straight down the list, Chuck Todd. We go straight down the list with facing down the mainstream media. I think it's going to take somebody who's able to not just be guided by my own personal grudge or vengeance or whatever, but by being guided by the Constitution and what's right for this country, by my own convictions. I don't think it's being done by us. It goes back to that question about my faith is what guides me. It's not being done by us. It is being done through us. That's what gives me my freedom. When you fall into the trap of thinking it's all being done by you, that's actually, for me at least, constraining. When we remind ourselves God puts us here for a purpose, that some government bureaucrat doesn't seem like such an obstacle along the way to get the job done. So yes, I believe, you believe in God, first thing to know is you're not God. I'm not God. I'm not going to tell you what's going to exactly play out over the next year. None of us, nobody here can do that. But what I can tell you is that I believe I am the last best chance that we have to stand up and make sure we have a country that your generation can actually grow up in. We're skating on thin ice right now. I don't think we can afford the risk of, if you see where the puck is going, to still walk our way into the trap that's already been laid for us. You're going to look back in 12 months. I don't think you're going to look back, and God forbid whatever's happening in the next year, to say that we were shocked by what happened. I think we'll look back in 12 months and say, what the heck were we thinking? Without actually understanding how we could have chosen a different direction. That's standing right here. And so even for those of you who may have thought of going a different direction 6 months ago or 3 months ago, I'm asking you to open your eyes. It's been laid out about as obviously as it can be. The system will not let the man get anywhere near the White House. I will take him as my most important advisor, but our movement is bigger than one man. America First does not belong to Donald Trump. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you, to us, to we the people. It's also not going to be some president coming from on high to save us, like some political messiah from the White House. I'm not going to sell you that. If we're going to be saved, it is going to be because we save ourselves. But I'm going to do my part. And there's nobody in America who's going to be better positioned now with the knowledge and ability of how to shut down that deep state. Fix that, the rest of it automatically follows. And so, yes, I'm asking you all to do your part on January 15th. Even, and maybe even especially, those who haven't participated in this caucus process before. I think we're going to win the Iowa caucus. I think we're going to do it because many, if not most of our supporters are non-traditional, non-polled supporters. Most of our supporters have not been polled. I think we're going to deliver a victory here at the Iowa caucus for the same reason that I will deliver a landslide, a moral mandate in the general election, which is what we need for this country too. 40% of our donors to this campaign, 150,000 some odd donors, are first-time ever donors to the GOP. That number is 2% for a normal Republican candidate. So yes, I think I can do for this country what nobody else can, which is to take our own agenda further without compromising, and, dare I say, unite this country in the process. And if we get that right now, then we don't have to be this nation in decline anymore. We don't have to be at the end of the ancient Roman Empire. I think as a nation right now, we're really just a little young, actually. Going through our own version of our adolescence. Figuring out who we're going to be when we grow up. I think that's what George Washington would tell us if he were here today, that you still do have another 250 years and then some still left in you, but you're going to have to do it like we did in 1776 by stepping up and seizing and recreating that nation for yourself. That's what our founding fathers would say if they were alive now. Thomas Jefferson was 33 when he wrote that declaration. And he invented the swivel chair while he was at it, actually. Fact of history. Benjamin Franklin, he was a co-signer of that Declaration of Independence, invented the Franklin stove, the bifocal spectacle. Robert Livingston, while he was an ambassador to France, invented in his spare time a key component of the steamship. These are our founding fathers. There was something in the water back then in 1776. I think we live in a 1776 moment right now. And I think it's going to take that next generation to reach and lead this country to our future. And so, yes, if you all do your part, and I'm asking you for your help and your vote on January 15th. I'm asking you for a little more than that, to spread the message and bring about 10 people in this community. Tell them what we talked about today and bring them on that day. By the way, it's going to be a cold day. I think that's going to be a good thing. I was thinking about that. I think it's going to be a good thing. It's going to select for the people who are really willing to brave a little bit of cold. The other campaigns, by the way, canceled their events today. I don't think George Washington canceled his crossing of the Delaware, okay, for a little bit of snow. If we're going to face off Xi Jinping, you better be able to face a snow day, and I thank you all for coming out, too. But if you all do your part on that cold night in a week from, exactly a week from where we are right now, in another room like this, figure out where your precinct is and you go there. Take 30 minutes of your time to save this country and tell 10 people and bring them with you, too. If you all do your part, our family and I, we will do ours, to make sure we create that country where we will look our kids in the eye and tell them, and mean it, that you get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication. And that you know what? You are free to speak your minds at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And with your help, that is what we are going to revive to save this great country.